Salam Media.
Across to be joined by a well-known British and Palestinian academic, political activist, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, and we're talking about Afghanistan. And we've heard about sporadic protests that have taken place beyond Jalalabad, and this is over the Afghan flag. Uh, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome as always.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, Jazakallah for your time with us this morning. Now, obviously, these developments that have been taking place in Afghanistan. Last night, I had quite a detailed discussion, but we obviously are learning about sporadic protests that have been taking place, and we are going to be having some of these issues, Dr. Tamimi, considering that obviously with the return of the Taliban into power, things are likely to change, and they're not going to be the same that Afghans have experienced in the last 20 years in the absence of this of the Taliban government.
Well, very expectedly, 20 years, an entire generation has grown up during that period, and there was a process going on the ground of creating a different nation to the one that preceded the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. And therefore, we expect some people will not like the Taliban to be in charge. Some people would have preferred the Americans continued to be there to protect the puppet government they installed when they invaded the country. So it's not going to be a free ride for the Taliban or anybody else who is struggling to see Afghanistan independent again.
Yes. Now, obviously, initially, and the initial assessment in terms of the Taliban, and since they basically taken over the country, shows us one thing, that this seems to be a different Taliban from the Taliban that we've known 20 years ago. And we've also seen it in their very first press conference, and in terms of the engagement with the media, how they have been basically reaching out to Afghans in general. So, as you're saying, a new generation that has grown up in the last 20 years, but also possibly will be looking at a different generation of Taliban in power.
Definitely. I mean, we've seen the spokesperson for the Taliban, Zabihullah Mujahid. He's a young man. Probably he was in his childhood when Afghanistan was invaded. Therefore, so much has happened since then. And I think the Taliban, like many people around the world, and especially in the Muslim world, have become more exposed to social media, to the fact that the entire globe has become a small village and people can be seen and perceived wherever they happen to be. And probably they've been advised and taught that the way they spoke before, the way they expressed themselves, did not convey their message correctly to the world. And I think, yes, we are hearing a different language, a much more refined language from them. But also, to be fair, the world didn't really give much of an opportunity to the Taliban during the first the earlier time when they were in power. They were in power for about 5 years. Initially, their arrival in Afghanistan was welcomed. They finished off the civil war that was destroying the country. They ended the growing of opium. They cleansed the country from all sorts of crime. But because of what was perceived as their association with Al Qaeda, their country was invaded, or this was the pretext at the time. So we didn't really hear much from Taliban then, although the little we heard wasn't as refined as their discourse proves to be today.
Well, certainly, and I think, as you mentioned, technology, social media, and it does appear from the very first press conference that even the Taliban, the new leadership within the Taliban, a lot more media savvy, and obviously making the right noises. Also, at a time like this, when one looks at obviously when they just obviously after taking over Kabul, in terms of being forgiving, we haven't heard. There were many people that were skeptical in terms of rampage, or the Taliban would run rampage in the country, and particularly the issues surrounding women, girls. All these discussions started taking place, and it does appear as if the Taliban has proven a lot wrong in the initial few days.
Indeed, the Taliban discourse as well as attitude has proven many people wrong. But we need to remember that there has been mountains of propaganda against the Taliban. The US media and the media of the allies of the United States of America never ceased over the past 20 years to tell the world stories about the Taliban that were inaccurate. They were not fair to them. And now the Taliban have an opportunity to show the real face to the world and speak to the world. I'm really delighted to hear the way they speak. And I would even go as far as saying that some of our own Arab Islamic movements can learn lessons from the Taliban today.
Well, certainly, and just talking about the Muslims from the Arab world and other Muslim countries in terms of embracing Taliban and providing them with the type of support they need, because we know there's been a lot of destruction, there's been a lot of devastation, and it's going to take a while. It's going to take them a long, long time, obviously, to rebuild the country. We know about the humanitarian disaster, we know about poverty. There is just so much destruction in the wake of this occupation in the last 20 years that has been left in Afghanistan. What level of support should the Muslim world be giving the Taliban at this point in time, Dr. Azzam Tamimi?
Well, if the Taliban prove what themselves, as they have been saying, they want to govern the entire country of Afghanistan as representatives of all the people with all their different sects and races, etc. And they prove that they truly want to deliver justice to the people of Afghanistan. They deserve all the support they need, definitely. But remember that the Taliban have fought this war against the Americans over 20 years with very little support from anywhere in the Muslim world. So they managed to jump the first big hurdle alone, and I'm sure they will be able to manage, although some help from here or there is not going to be bad. But one aspect of a help they really need more than anything else is to refute the claims about them, the negative propaganda, the stereotyping that is full of press pages and media programs, even here in the Arab and Muslim countries. We need to stand by them first because they fought against foreign occupation, and their fight was legitimate by all standards. And second, because uh, uh, although they ruled Afghanistan for a very brief period before the invasion, they managed well, actually, compared to the groups of the Mujahideen, who after removing the Soviet occupation from Afghanistan started fighting each other for power. And I think the Taliban proved to be more of service to the Afghani people than anybody else. And let's hope they also do a good job now.
Well, certainly. And, just finally, obviously, we see reports coming through like the one out of Jalalabad, people protesting, fights over a flag. Now, obviously, these, the mainstream media will make a meal out of any dissent or any little issue that takes place. And I'm sure, this is not as serious as it sounds, but knowing the mainstream media, any little thing they're going to latch on, they're going to make a meal of, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a big issue. But I think the key areas, or just looking at the immediate priorities of the Taliban government? Just in your assessment and your analysis, Dr. Tamimi, what should the Taliban government be focusing on?
Well, the Taliban need to be aware, and I'm sure that they must be aware of the fact that the biggest challenge facing them is that their enemies, foremost the United States of America and its allies, will use local agents as well as regional powers in order to impose failure on the Taliban. This is what they did to Hamas in Palestine. This is what they did to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, to Ennahda in Tunisia. The idea is to prove that these Islamists or Islamic groups cannot rule and cannot bring order and cannot deliver justice. And they try to do this by stirring up local tensions, problems, but probably staging strikes. So they need to be aware of this if they are not. But as I said, I'm sure they must be aware of this. They seem to be really enlightened and educated. And then press ahead with bringing the people to agree with them on a united objective. And the united objective for all of Afghanistan is to come out of the dark ages of American imperialism. American imperialism was a very bad dark period in the history of this country, and they need to overcome it. And they will find that many Afghanis will agree with them. The Americans have killed hundreds of thousands of Afghanis. They wiped out entire wedding parties, claiming to be fighting terrorists. And therefore, I'm sure that most of the Afghanis are happy to see the back of the Americans and their allies. And therefore, they need to work together with the Taliban in order to defy those who want to disrupt the process or sabotage the transformation.
Dr. Tamimi, we're going to have to leave it at that. I know there's a lot more we can talk about, but unfortunately, time is of the essence. But as always, we appreciate your time with us here on Salam Media. All the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Dr. Azzam Tamimi with us this morning. We're going to go for a quick break. We'll be joined by Shinas Parak, CEO of Penny Appeal.